nice visit with your
and
wife.
Deborah and Yanling.
Yingling.
Uh,
Yeah.
Yanling speak Mandarin.
Yeah, I can
讲
speak
国语，讲
Mandarin.
国语。
I come from mainland China.
你
How
讲
are you?
哦，讲国语啊。
Oh
我是
yeah.
天津来的。
Oh yeah. Okay. You're also Chinese.
Sorry, I'm
Wow.
speaking Chinese to her.
Yeah. We both are Chinese. I come from Sichuan province.
Oh yeah, I'm from Hebei.
Oh,
Hebei.
Hebei. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, next.
All I know is I think ni hao. That means hello.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well,
That's all.
Great.
Don't worry, that's all I can say. 你好。
My wife is barbarian. She only know how to say 你好.
Ni hao, I know.
Wow, fantastic. So if you don't mind, I will start recording. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Recording in progress.
There we go. So we don't have to transcribe.
Yeah.
Great. And first of all, thank you for meeting with us. I've been a big fan of your work. In my work on death and dying, I cite you. We use some of your items in our surveys. So it's actually really a pleasure to put a face to the name.
I'm so happy to meet you too, because I'm very lonely. Because everybody talk about happiness. I'm just out guy talk about suffering and death. So I'm all by myself. And now I getting followers from MIT and Harvard. So I'm less lonely. But now you guys are joining me. That'd be great.
What do they say? Misery loves company, right? And again, it's people who study death and dying. People always think we're a little weird to start
Yeah,
with.
that's
They
what
think you're gloomy, and then they find out you're happy, and they're surprised.
They think we are a party pooper.
Party pooper, exactly. But as I say, like, it's going to happen to everybody, so we might as well help people prepare.
So I'm dealing with cancer, dealing with knee replacement, and all kinds of trouble. But I'm still rejoicing and very much alive, you can see, because I studied suffering all my life. So
It does indeed give perspective.
so I'm well prepared.
You are when it gets bad. So it's a pleasure to meet with you. And I thought what we could do is I could just give you a little bit of background about our project, kind of above what you've learned from Yenling. And then kind of I'm all ears to hear your thoughts. So maybe about right before the pandemic, the Templeton Foundation put out a call for proposals on flourishing. As you know, the positive psychology movement, and a group of us from BU got together just to bat around some ideas. And sorry, the lawnmower is going next door. We came up with the idea that, flourishing is easy if everything in your life has been wonderful. But is it possible to flourish for people who really have experienced extreme adversity? And so that's kind of the motivating foundation for this project. And it's kind of multi-pronged. We have a survey data project. We also have some in-depth interviews that are happening in the field with cancer patients, with recent refugees, with very disadvantaged youth. And then our expert interviews, which is where you come in and really just hearing what do experts think, what are your critiques, do that you share our critiques of some of the positive psychology movement, and your thoughts on kind of whether and how flourishing is possible for those who have experienced adversity. Maybe it looks very different than it does for middle-class healthy people. And so we're kind of all ears, and we'll be writing up a conceptual piece and really just hoping to learn where the field is going from those who have been focused on it from very different angles. So that's kind of a little bit about us, and I'll teach you if you have any questions about what we're doing, and then I will tap your wisdom and expertise.
So do you guys have any conceptual framework, any theoretical framework for your research?
That's a good question. That's what we're working on now, because we are very interdisciplinary. So as a sociologist, I use cumulative disadvantage frameworks, right? And how cumulative advantage accumulates over time. And so there's both a greater number of adversities and fewer resources with which to address them. The psychologists tend to focus more on kind of the internal workings. And so what we're trying to do is actually come up with a more integrative framework that addresses the micro and macro, right? Because the positive psych movement is all about thinking yourself happy, whereas in sociology we realize structures need to change, and so that's what we're actually developing over the course of this kind of conceptual article we're trying to put together.
Okay. Do you have follow any taxonomy of suffering? Because for any science to develop, we need to have basic language, basic terms, right?
Yeah.
So right now I'm working on a taxonomy.
Oh, wonderful.
Because taxonomy will include systemic issues like society, culture, discrimination, structural issues, right? And then you have this culture and nature, and also personal. So do you guys have any taxonomy?
A bit. We're focusing on kind of selective types of suffering in different domains.
Okay.
So kind of biological, physical. Another has to do with kind of economic.
Okay.
Another is kind of social, having to do with social dislocation, for instance. So kind of the loss of something, whether it's security, bodily capacities, ontological security, and so we're focusing it on dimensions. But yeah, I'd love to hear kind of what your thoughts are about taxonomies that have been useful in your work, or taxonomies you developed that you're now refining.
I'm still working on it right now. I'm struck. It's so complicated because you have some suffering is external, some suffering is internal, some suffering is controllable, some suffering is uncontrollable, some suffering is necessary, some suffering is unnecessary. So at least you have this simple classification, and then you have etiology, right? The etiology, where it comes from nature, where it comes from culture, where they come from the solar system, where they come from within yourself. So I'm still working with my friend at Harvard, we're still back and forth, still not finalized yet, but pretty close. So I'll let you know, okay?
Absolutely. And another thing we're thinking about also is the dimension of time, kind of whether it's time delimited and whether it's something that happens once. And, thinking from the stress paradigm, there are some things that are kind of acute events, others are more long lasting. So again, coming up to that theme of time, which we think is important.
But of course, time is always a important dimension. In fact, most of our suffering come from either the past, aversive childhood experience, or some early trauma, either from the past or from the future. The future including all the imagined, all the anticipated disasters that may happen. So this is strange. Most of suffering is not from the present, but burden from the past, all the worries about the future. So that's why suffering is such a reality, because at any point in time, we carry this burden from the past, the big load of worries from the future, and also present difficulties. So here we are. So my theoretical framework is existential psychology. That to live, to suffer is to find meaning for suffering.
Yeah.
And my early research is I hate to say that because I play God while I do animal research.
Huh.
I randomly assign some rat fortunate, they're from rich family, some rats from poor family. So one group of rats are deprived in childhood, in babyhood. So I also deal with aversive environment. And one group of rats grew up in peace and prosperity. One grew up in a world of stimulation, shock and light, and shocking them. Okay. Do you know? For my years of research, do you know what's finding? Invariably, animals who grow up and able to adapt to the adverse environment, they perform better than the rich rats.
Yeah.
The poor defeat the rat. Do you know what motivated my research?
Yeah.
Because I'm from China.
Yeah.
We were taught 吃得苦中苦，才做人上人。If you cannot endure more suffering than other people, you will never excel. So that we were drilled in primary school, at home. 吃苦is a virtue. Eating bitterness is a virtue. That if you don't learn how to eat, if you do not learn how to eat suffering, you will never amount to anything. Right, Fanny? Do you agree? Fanny, right? That's how we learn China.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a very classic saying in China. Like only you can work hard, you can be successful.
Without suffering.
Yeah.
So that is where I come from. So my essential, partly from in essential psychology in Europe, Franco and Kierkegaard and what the guy, the creative genius. What the guy I forgot the name. Franco influenced by him a great deal. He wrote a book on the Superman. What's his name?
Viktor Frankl.
Viktor Frankl's philosopher. The philosopher who talked about God is dead. The guy who wrote a book. What's his name? Nietzsche. Yes, thank you. Just kidding. So my existential part of psychology, partly from European existentialism, partly come from the Chinese culture. The suffering is the foundation of everything. So therefore, I do not think of suffering as, something bad happened, horrible bad. How could you have, the parapsychologists consider suffering as an intruder, as an unfortunate event. Want to deal with it as something that, to get around it if possible, just consider suffering as an unfortunate event happen. But for me as Chinese, suffering is part of life. Suffering is not something foreign to us. It's not an intruder. It's our teacher. It's our teacher, our master, our friend.
Interesting.
So that's why the part of psychology hate me for saying that.
Yeah.
They think the suffering is bad. I said, no, it's not bad. It's good for you. I said they got mad, right? They reject. They can't accept that, right? So I said, well, that's where I came from. So there are two kinds of parapsychology. One is the Chinese parapsychology, one is the American parapsychology. The Chinese parapsychology is based on suffering. The American parapsychology is based on avoiding suffering.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I'd like to hear a bit about kind of how these two compare. So do you think suffering is a necessary prerequisite to attain?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying, that flourishing comes from overcoming suffering. It is through learning how to live with the dark side or dark side. You have an evil twin within you. Do you know who's ugly, nasty, and mean?
The angel devil, right?
that all of us, there's an internal struggle between good and evil, and the bright side and dark side. So you can't escape that from that. It's part of everybody. The internal struggle between good and evil happening in the best of us. Apostle Paul talked about his internal struggle. All the saints talk about internal struggle, from Augustine to all the saints. So it's inevitable. How you talk about suffering as something foreign? Suffering, you're suffering because you have this internal war. You have a civil war within you. If you don't know how to come to terms, come to peace with the darker side of you, you can never be whole. Flourishing means become whole. Suffering means flourishing depends on living in harmony with yourself, in harmony with people, in harmony with heaven and earth. The Chinese concept 天地人和，有没有听过这句话？天地人和。The ideal flourishing is to be well attuned with yourself, attuned with people, attuned with heaven, attuned with equality, with planet Earth. So that's a piece of flourishing. Not like American psychology, the me. Someone says, big me. Look at how pretty I look, how strong I am. That's American part of psychology. The Asian part of psychology is interpersonal. Being at peace with other people, another traditional Chinese philosophy. Being at peace with people, interpersonal. And also at peace with heaven, at peace with earth. So it's completely, totally, it's very cosmo, holistic. It's not just for an individual. So my psychology is not an individual. My psychology on systems, culture, and the universe.
Yeah. And the universe layer, and kind of much beyond the individual of the dyad.
Yeah, so that's why. So that's why that teaches us to be humble, right? Mm-hmm. Which is was a tiny little drop of water in the ocean. So it teaches us to be more respectful of other people's views. You know, American power psychology is so arrogant. They reject every other country's view. They reject my view. They continue. Right now, Asians love my work. Europe love my work. American power psychology continue to reject my view.
Huh. Interesting. And it's interesting you say that. Do you think, because there is very much this kind of individual level Western capitalist focus.
They're weird.
Yeah, weird. That's actually one of the lists we have in our questions. And
weird,
if you could, if you had, not naming any names, let's say Seligman was sitting here, what would you want I'm thinking like what would you want the positive psychology folks to know? Or are there particular concepts from other cultures that you think we really need to dig into that have been ignored?
So want to be unveiled, go beyond weirdness, okay?
Yeah.
Beyond this individualistic culture, beyond this consumerist, capitalist, and egotistic concept. More think about if we want to have flourishing, we can flourish on the Titanic, which heading in the wrong direction. When in the sea of suffering, people are screaming for help, struggling. How you play music, enjoy sun and dance? How you do that? What people around you are thinking and dying. You can play music, dance, and drinking wine, and yourself heading to disaster.
Interesting.
So I think that look around you, see all the people who are in Africa, in many people, how you talk about your happiness when all the people around you are suffering, dying. what's your compassion as a human being?
Yeah.
What's your empathy? So I'll send you some of my recent paper dealing with these issues. I will send you some of my recent papers dealing with how to incorporate the idea of suffering into the framework of well-being and flourishing.
Wonderful.
So it's very different from American parapsychology.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I think that they have. So they also contribute, assuming that people are living in peace and prosperity. So their work is aiming at people living in the territory, wanting to from 0 to +8. My parapsychology is for people living from -A to +A, cover the whole range. Their parapsychology on the top, the positive territory, neutral and positive territory. So my Chinese parapsychology covers the whole spectrum, from negative 10 to positive 10, the whole spectrum, much broader. So mine will be incorporate theirs, but theirs doesn't include me. That doesn't include the Asian view.
Yes. Interesting. Yes, and so one question you had, it's something you said earlier that was very powerful, that kind of flourishing is a product of overcoming suffering. So if someone has led a life of complete privilege, for instance, with very little adversity, can they flourish? What might it look like?
No.
What are your thoughts? That's interesting.
I will feel sorry for you. If you live in privilege, you never suffer, then the best can happen to you that you live a shadow life. You live a shadow life, you don't know what life is all about. When tragedy strikes, you collapse. Because your shadow, you have no foundation. You're not prepared. Your person grew up in privilege. And remember the story about about Buddha. I mean, the parents try to protect him from suffering, try to shield him from suffering. But when he go out and see suffering for the first time, his world collapsed. So he cannot live himself. So he had to walk away from the palace and search for answer to his suffering. That's the origin of Buddhism. So you be protected by, and for example, another powerful story by Tolstoy, the death of Ivan, the death of Ivan. So he becomes your life and a good position, but all of a sudden he was struck by illness. His world collapsed. He has no depths to deal with suffering, so gone crazy. He screams day and night, suffering intensely, until he learned with servant that life should not be all by yourself. That the servant always calm and peaceful. So he learned that he realized that he had lived wrongly. He had lived his life wrongly. So in his deathbed, he realized that he began to treat his wife better, treat his servant better. So that awakening, this awakening saved him from suffering. Right away his pain gone. He's still sick, but his agony, his regret, his pain, his complaints are gone. So he died happy. So I'm saying that you try to protect people from suffering. Tell them, the worldview, life is safe and sweet. No, that's nonsense. They're also supported by Templeton, the worldview research. That's pure nonsense. Life is sweet and safe. you tell people, people laugh at you. Of course, that we correlate with other self-aggrandization. You know, part of what will correlate with self-rated. So they are the same self-deception. According to Buddhism, it's called based on delusion, self-deception. They all self-report. Of course, they're all correlated, but they're all based on the same source. They're all based on the same source. So I'm not saying that. So my position is that real flourishing comes from overcoming suffering, because suffering is inescapable, unavoidable aspect of life. You cannot have a flourishing without talking about suffering.
Interesting. So that's really interesting. That kind of leads to one of the other questions I have on my paper here. So, given that among those who have suffered, these are the people who can flourish, and among them, do you believe that there's flourishing as kind of one collection, or are there distinctive pathways? Might flourishing be spiritual for one, social for others? What are the components of flourishing to you?
I'm saying that different pathways, you can call it different pathways. People come, basically flourishing is very simple, based on Aristotle's concept of eudaimonia. Flourishing basically means that to excel, to develop your potential, to develop your nature. So there's only one way. The one way means to fully develop your nature. That's all. That's what it is, right? Kind of Aristotle. And the Chinese psychology, same thing. Chinese psychology also not only fully develop your nature, but also fully in harmony with other people and with the environment. So the Chinese psychology adding the other dimensions, okay? But the basic dimension is that fully develop your potential, which is according to your nature, according to your gifts, according to your talents, and also according to the demand of your life. Demand of the time. For example, there's so many Chinese writers during the Second World War, or scholars, Chinese scholars. When Japan invaded China, their life changed. They say, how can I continue to pursue my career? So they instead of pursuing their career, they joined the fight against Japan. So the demand of situation, right? The demand of situation means that right now your life is most meaningful when you try to save your homeland, try to save your home, your country. So they joined the resistance. They joined the resistance or joined the army to fight against Japanese. So the pathway changes as circumstances changes, right? But even when you join the army, you join resistance, they still seek opportunity to use their talents. Either in providing medical care, or join the entertainment, trying the arts and the literature, try to encourage the soldiers, encourage people. So they still use their gifts, right? Even the join resistance. So therefore, for any, at any particular time, it depends on your nature, depends on the demand of circumstances. But boiled down, it's still what you have to develop what within you.
Interesting.
The flourishing means that you develop your gift and then give it away to humanity. So you create some value to society. So this American idea that even Hitler, even serial killer can live a meaningful life, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. I mean, if everything based on subjective, we cannot have a science of psychology. We cannot have science of flourishing. If everything depends on subjective move, so most philosophers believe that, or sociologists believe that they have some objective evidence. So there's a debate between scientific realism and subjectivism. You need both. You cannot just based on subjective, completely social construction without any concern about reality. There is some reality. Suffering is reality. The war is reality. Poverty is reality. Poverty is not subjective construction. But no food on the table, I'm starving. Okay? Starvation is not subjective construction. My stomach has no food. I'm collapsing. I'm dying. Right? So it had to be both subjective and scientifically realism. Given that framework, given that holistic framework, there are different pathways. The pathway of collective effort to improve society or improve the work condition require collaboration among countries. It's not individual effort now. Not a group of people, group of countries work together and say, if we don't collaborate, have peace, we'll kill each other, we kill ourselves. Nuclear war can destroy humanity. Let's sit down and talk. Let's try to work out something, let's hear each other, learn to each other, and collaborate. So that's one pathway, right? So at even each level, you have to have a pathway at the individual level, at the social level, at the international level, at the different levels, right? And for the individual, also different levels. Franco talked about 3 levels. One level is you contribute to flourishing through your creative work. You apply your heart, your mind, your soul to do whatever you do. Then you feel good about yourself. Also, that is an experiential level. It means that you accept life as it is with an attitude of gratitude and appreciation. So appreciate all little things your spouse do for you, or appreciate sunset, sunrise, appreciate the fact that I'm still alive. At age 85, I'm still alive.
Wow.
I'm still alive. I thank God every day.
Wow.
I have cancer, I'm still alive. So an attitude of appreciation, right? And finally, the attitude of defiance, the attitude of courage, the attitude of rebellions. So I, as a Chinese, come from North America, look at American psychology, I rebel against it because my whole body recoils against the idea. Against my whole body, every cell of my body recoils against that teaching. I said, that's not what life is all about. Life is not like that. Life is not always peace and prosperity. Life is not always a cakewalk. Life is not just. My whole body recoil against that. My body rebel against that. Because my life experience, my culture, taught me suffering is part of life. You better make peace with suffering. You better learn how to transcend and transform suffering in order to flourish. So the rebellious is part of flourishing. Let me rebel about something that's not right. So the American parapsychology, Europe rebel against that. Asian rebel against that. Because it simply is not true from their life experience. So anything that's true had to meet three criteria. It had to be true through experimental tests. It had to be true universally. It had to be true, resonate with your personal experience. That is true for your experience. Yeah, it's true. It's true. I experienced that in my life. You had to resonate with it, right? So you had to pass these three tests. And
it is inspiring. Yeah. And that's helped. You're getting almost all of the questions that I have kind of written down here. And
I'll send you some of my paper. You have a better idea.
Yes, absolutely. And so when we think about kind of what flourishing is, and we've been talking about kind of the sources and pathways, but once someone has suffered, they've overcome, they've kind of faced their own mortality, are there essential components that you believe belong to flourishing? So for instance, if you're flourishing physically but not spiritually, for instance, is that still flourishing? Do you believe there are certain components one needs to be flourishing?
Okay,
how many dimensions, for instance?
Okay. Now, this is another thing that I'm fighting with the American way of thinking. Okay, Americans tend to break things down in different compartments, try to take a molecular approach. So Asian and me tend to take a more holistic approach.
Great.
So I think Aristotle also take a holistic approach. Talk about flourishing is the whole person. It's not part of the person. You flourish your life. Flourishing your whole life is flourishing, not economically flourishing. This one. Economical prosperity contributes to flourishing, but the idea of flourishing is about a person's life. Okay, it's not one part of it. We can talk about economical well-being, but talk about economic flourishing is talk about economic prosperity, prosperous. But flourishing is a concept. It's a psychological concept. It's a philosophical psychological concept describing life. It is simply say that your life is fully developed, able to bear fruit, bear abundant fruit, able to spread your branches far and wide, able to produce unique fruit. So this tree is flourishing. You cannot talk about this branch flourish, this branch flourish. The whole tree flourish. So the idea of different kind of flourishing, it doesn't sit very well with me. We can talk about different kind of well-being, but flourishing talk about life, same as vitality. A flourishing life is a life with vitality. vitality is the energy, is a life energy, life force that grow, that in spite of pressure, in spite of suffering, in spite of hardship, you should grow and flourish. So flourishing involving the idea of vitality. So vitality is again your life and vitality, life as a whole. Some people talk about economic vitality. Okay. Some people are rich man. Why call rich? Why? Or you think about the guy talk about Viagra, your sexual vitality. Well, they're very different kind.
True.
We talk about vitality, talk about life vitality. It's not about sexual vitality or money vitality, or your power. So I'd rather preserve the concept of vitality or flourishing to a life as a whole, an individual life. I can tell what when they're doing well now, in different compartment, economic, physical health, when you're well now. But when I talk about individual life, I'd rather preserve the word flourishing to the individual life.
Yeah. Interesting. And so, do you think there's a better term, a more inclusive term, a more holistic term, rather than flourishing? Do you think we should kind of get rid of that term?
But you cannot get rid of that term because that's why I say vitality is another term. But the flourishing is not. Flourishing means that everybody starts as a seed. Okay? When a baby is born, it's a seed. It's kind of the seed. The baby needs nourishing, needs education. In order to flourish, in order to grow, and bear fruit, and spread the branches, and develop the roots. So an oak tree would be a good example. The tiny little seed become a tree. Or the Bible used the word what do you call the Bible used the word, also the word seed. Right? Your seed doesn't die; it cannot multiply. Some multiply 10%, some multiply 100%. They're flourishing. Some on hard soil, they only multiply 10%. So to the environment, the circumstances helps. If we are in a very restricting, oppressive, or very poor environment, with lacking opportunity, so many people are suffering because they don't have opportunities. So they're flourishing. They can still flourish, but not fully. So that's why I say flourishing as a whole still helps. Whether you're fully flourishing or not really flourishing, you can develop a little bit, but not fully flourishing. So flourishing has given the concept of fully, able you fully develop your talents and make a full contribution to society.
Very interesting. Great. Yes. Yeah, really thought-provoking words. Let's see. And being mindful of time here, I know we have just about 12 minutes. So I guess, what are when you think about the legacy of your work, which has been so rich, right? What are maybe one or two key messages that you would like to leave for the next generation of flourishing researchers?
Very simple.
Because you've worked in so many different
I
areas, and I've kind of gotten some of the key themes
summarize
here.
one statement. That means no pain, no gain.
No pain. Yep. Out of the U.S. phrase, "That which does not kill you makes you stronger."
And better.
Yep.
And true flourishing come from overcoming, transcending, and transforming suffering. So you can deal with suffering. You can either overcome and you can end unnecessary suffering. In other words, don't do stupid things. Don't have an affair. Don't steal. Don't cheat. Okay? You can end unnecessary suffering by do not do unethical things. If you do bad things, your evil will catch up with you. So
True.
if you have affair, sooner or later you'll be exposed. Okay? So you can end another suffering. And you can overcome some suffering that are solvable. Some suffering is totally a problem that you can resolve the issue. Some problems are resolvable or solvable. Okay? Some suffering can only endure. To live is to suffer. In some small way, right? To endure the daily hassle, having to deal with selfish people, dealing with fake news. There are all kinds of suffering. You have to endure it, right? Endurance is a virtue, right? So develop a virtue to endure it. So every suffering is an opportunity for virtue.
Huh.
And every virtue is the ground for happiness. You cannot have happiness without virtue. So that's why suffering needs virtue and character. Virtue lead to happiness. See the connection? So therefore, you learn how to endure suffering, and also, okay, more important now, you learn how to transcend suffering, rise above suffering. That means what I mean. That means your ego has to be balanced. Your self-enhancement has to be balanced by self-transcendence. If no self-transcendence, only self-enhancement, then you have conflict. Everybody has a huge ego. Everybody wants to enhance. Bam, bam, bam. There's a war. They're fighting in the family, fighting in the organization, fighting between nations, all without this expansion. Endless expansion is war. It's endless expansion and destruction. Endless expansion means mutual destruction. Okay? Internationally and also individually. So therefore, self-enhancement had to be moderated and balanced by self-transcendence. Transcend self-interest. Transcend ego. Transcend time and space. Transcend culture. So when we practice self-transcendence, we are more likely to embrace each other. Okay? Finally, we can transform suffering. Wow. Usually through meaning, through creativity, through imagination, through intuition, through cooperation, through collective effort. Say, well, how can we work together to make the society a kinder and gentler place? How can we work together to reduce racial discrimination, and reduce gender war, and reduce poverty. There's no reason for poverty. But some people, 1% of American owns 10% of all the wealth, owns 80% of the wealth, 80% of the wealth. Well, that's insane, right? I mean, nobody should be starving, because the world have enough food, enough resources to feed everybody. No country should be starving, no person should be starving. We have this inequality, this income gap. It become human greed, selfishness.
Yeah.
Okay, I run out of steam.
Yes. Well, it's funny, you actually just answered what was my last question, which was the individual level focus isn't working. And so what can we do as a society, either as policymakers, social change? And you absolutely answered
Okay.
that question, this kind of top down,
Yeah, I mentioned
whatever we
about,
can do to minimize income inequality, racial oppression, and all the social ills. Right?
so I mentioned about collective coping a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
Collective mean not only involving different people, but involving different culture, different nation. If we do not learn to work together, we eventually will self-destruct. Human race cannot last for long with all the nuclear power, all the crazy people in charge, in control. I mean, we all have a really existential threat of nuclear war. Okay, it's real. This is not. Look what happened in Ukraine, and now China talk about invading Taiwan. You know, why can't we talk? Okay, resolve issue peacefully. Yeah. So eventually, if they don't know how to talk, eventually, so therefore our message is very important. If we do not learn how to live together, we eventually kill each other.
Yeah. Absolutely right. I think we need a changed world in order to enhance flourishing. We can't just think our way in. We need a more fair and just and equitable planet, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for dedicating to sharing your knowledge and your time with us. We have this all recorded, and we're just truly grateful. And I've read much of your work. And if you have brand new stuff hot off the press, please feel free to send it over, and I will read very carefully.
I will. Okay, so next time you, I'll send some papers, okay?
Yes, I would love to. And do let us know next time you're in Cambridge visiting your sons.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, welcome to
Yeah,
Boston.
my wife will.
We will get together, I'm sure. And also, anytime you wanted to have a Zoom, yeah, we could always set it up. Because